Ladies and gents, boys and girls, today it is me and my two pimples and my third pimple, which is my friend called Vidur, joining us today. And why? Because Varun is busy increasing his ranks on his OnlyFans account by posting nudes on Instagram from his trip to Mauritius. By the way, Vidur, have you seen Varun Dugirala's nudies in
Not yet. I have
Mauritius?
to sign up to his OnlyFans.
This is what happens when you quit your full time job. You just basically have to hoe yourself out on platforms like Cameo and OnlyFans, which is what Varun's doing right now to pay his bills. So, guys,
Well,
please jump in, jump in.
he's probably 10x richer than when he started off this podcast. I mean, OnlyFans is the way to make money right now. So, solid decision
That is
right
true.
there.
That is true. But guys, you may be wondering why I have gone from from Varun to Vidur. And Vidur, do you want to tell our listeners as to why you are occupying a space on our very popular Think Fast today? What are your qualifications?
Well, I have no qualifications. So, trust me, I am wondering why I'm here as well. But my theory is Varun is basically the punching bag for you on the show. I know a lot of listeners have told you this. So, you wanted a new punching bag, a bigger punching bag, might I add.
That is true.
And I'm
Yeah.
here to fill the big shoes of Varun. Shout out to Varun, by the way. And my job here is to ask you and tell you a lot about movies and for you to shut me down. That's my big
Yes.
takeaway from Varun's contribution, at least in the beginning of most of your shows.
Which is almost accurately, it's almost accurate. You're almost there. But guys, the truth is, the only reason Vidur is here is because he has been single for the past 10 years. And because Tinder and Bumble refuse to do anything for him, I have gone to the last resort, which is putting him on my podcast to, help him
Thanks.
out with the ladies. So hoping this works for you at Vidur Singhal on Bumble, Tinder, and all other dating platforms that are out there. No, but jokes aside, guys,
And
Vidur's here
join my
because
OnlyFans.
say. And join your
Join my
OnlyFans,
OnlyFans.
yes. But guys, Vidur, apart from being a podcast junkie, he runs his own podcasting company. Apart from that, he's also this like alpha nerd. And for most of my close friends who've been to my house, you've probably been at the receiving end of multiple debates that Vidur and I have had on all things from crypto. So, from a Vidur qualification perspective, I think you should casually drop that you went to Carnegie Mellon the way most Harvard kids drop that they went to Harvard. What did you study
My
there, Vidur?
resume is, well, most Carnegie Mellon people are Ivy League rejects, so we never drop our qualifications. But I did go to Carnegie Mellon, same as your husband, might I add. And I studied engineering and economics because I was very indecisive. And then I did investment banking, which has nothing to do with pretty much either. And then I did some investing, and then I moved back to India, and I've been bumming around on the dollars I made ever since, just keeping up with
Amazing.
all things that you guys talk about in Think Fast because I have nothing better to do. I do run a podcasting company called Muncher, and that clues me into all things podcasting. For instance, Think Fast. And like you correctly said, you and I get into it whenever we meet on all the topics, such as ranging from Twitter to Dave Chappelle. And then people
Yeah.
around us become very uncomfortable because at least I enjoy disagreeing and sparring, and I'm like, like the Socratic method, trying to get to some answer, and everybody around us is like, oh guys, it's okay, mommy and daddy shouldn't fight. So I'm hoping to recreate some of that today and hope it's
Yes.
useful to your lovely listeners.
So let's get right into it, man. First off, with our intro segment, where we'll obviously cover a couple of hot takes and interesting things that have happened in all things tech startup business. But we cannot begin this podcast without talking about the Qatar FIFA 2022 finals, which let's
Messi.
add. Exqueeze, you slept through the finals, Vidur. What the fuck are you
There's no
celebrating
need
Messi for?
to divulge personal information. I woke up when the penalties were happening. You see the end, you see it all. But I heard and I know that it was an amazing final. Some of our mutual friends happened to be at that final and annoyingly
Yes.
sent us videos proving this. But
Very
what an
annoying.
event, man. And very clearly, the consensus seems to be best final of all time. And that's saying something.
Also,
Without
I
a
feel like
headbutt, best final.
every single female has like the hots for Mbappe after the
Mbappe.
like trio of goals that he scored. He was a class
Oh,
act.
I thought you were going to say something
Phenomenal.
else, actually. He was
What?
amazing. His hat trick was amazing. His 2 goals
And
in
he's
2 minutes.
sexy. He's a fine,
Yeah, but I
sexy
thought
thing.
Well, maybe I'll keep it safe for work because I don't know the vibe of this show yet. But he had some photos that got popular on Twitter that were where he was excited, let's just say. And that might be another
Okay.
reason he has some new fans.
Yeah, so we know what of the finals you were watching with, or we know what of the finals you were watching. But keeping Mbappe's stellar, performance aside, in multiple different dimensions, and of course, a fantastic win for Messi, given how much he put into how much he's put into this over the years, and that this is pretty much his what was it? Is his last set of matches that he's playing? What's the scene here?
More or less, let's just call it his Tendulkar moment, like when Tendulkar
Hmm.
finally won the World Cup, and it was
Yeah,
like the team was just saying it's all for him. That was
yeah,
clearly the vibe. He picked up the World Cup. He was the man of the hour. Everybody
yeah,
was essentially just happy for him as much as they were
yeah.
for Argentina. So, listen, I'm not a big football guy, to be honest. I
Hmm.
slept through the World Cup for one thing, but also we're like those people who tune in every 4 years. So I let
Yeah,
the greatest of all time debate go to the super fans, but I think this is as close to settling it as you can get if you cap it
yeah.
all off with winning your country the World Cup. And did you see the photos of people celebrating in Argentina? It
That
was
was
wild,
incredible. It was insane.
wild. The
Nothing,
drone
nothing.
shot of just,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's insane.
incredible.
Nothing comes close to winning, guys. And there was obviously a slew of LinkedIn messages and LinkedIn posts as a consequence of Argentina, Messi, Mbappe, and everything else. But let's not bore our listeners with that. The second piece of news, steering right into all things business, is RBI has apparently directed Razorpay to pause onboarding of new merchants. The RBI really seems to be cracking down on all sorts of fintech platforms and all sorts of companies. We saw what happened with Slice early on in the year, and you've obviously got Razorpay and a couple of others. Under the overall radar of all things RBI. We're going to be talking about all things fintech a little later in the episode, but anything else you want to call out to here, Vidur?
Yeah, just goes to show that when you're in the finance game, you're just one regulation away from dying. And right now, of
Yeah.
course, RBI has made it's a draconian move that you can't add new users. And we'll talk about that because we're talking about fintech today.
Hmm.
But just think about it, like one circular and your business gets arrested, right? And this is something banks have had to deal with throughout, but banks actually
Yeah.
have very deep rooted relationships with the RBI. Sometimes it's too deep rooted, maybe there's like
Hmm.
wink, wink, nudge, nudge, things changing hands, but at
Yeah.
the same time, if you're new to the game, and we're going to talk about SBF as well, unless you buy
Hmm.
your way into the big league, you're always at risk of new regulation.
Yeah. Of course, another piece of news that was making the rounds was the Block, which is a media company that apparently that used to cover or maybe still covers crypto news independently, was apparently secretly funded for over a year with money funneled into the Block CEO from the disgraced Sam Bankman-Fried's cryptocurrency trading firm. So really
Yeah.
goes to show that all things crypto and quote unquote Web3 seem to be almost moving in lockstep with respect to the giant sort of debacle that's happened in the world of crypto and Web3. I know you have a lot to say about SBF, but give us a little snippet into what lies ahead in your tirade against SBF, which will happen in the first half of our main
Well, for
segment.
one thing, SPF is in jail as of the past couple of days ago in Bahamian or
Deservedly.
Bahamian. Yeah, certainly deservedly, but the Bahamian, let's go with, is apparently one of the worst jail systems ever. So he wants extradition. We'll get into all that in like the deeper dive SPF story. But this block
Mhm.
thing is so fascinating because it's one of the many things that came out in the so-called SPF FTX crypto contagion. Because once FTX went down, people were like, "What else are we going to find out?" And this was like almost like one of the last things that came out, that he actually gave $43 million, and not to the block, by the way, but to the CEO, who then just sort
Yeah.
of ran his business as though he's independent, usually being a little bit more anti-Binance than people liked,
Hmm.
and than
Hmm.
the guy who runs Binance, CZ, liked. Afterwards,
Yeah.
CZ got to do a lap saying, "Oh, this is why they were always against us," and he's probably right. And the thing is, media is for sale to begin with, even when it's institutionalized. So when it's independent in like the wild, wild west of crypto, of course it's going to be for sale. But the way it was done so underhanded, it's kind of like finding out like Bernie Madoff, which maybe SBF is a corollary to, was
Hmm.
also funding like the biggest finance newsletter, that was like
Yeah.
propping up his firm. So it's like
Yeah.
layers upon layers. The blog still continues, by the way. It manages to
Hmm.
like retain its brand somehow, mostly because like the journalists, and they are journalists, some of them are ex-finance journalists, they sort of made this big hoo-ha about like, oh my God, I've never been more betrayed in my life, because that's probably how they felt. And I think people might stick around for it. So let's see.
What happens to the block? But switching gears, Netflix has released a teaser for Breakpoint, its new documentary series on tennis, which will be released on the 13th of Jan. We've seen the magic of Netflix. Whatever you may say about their performance on public markets, no one can take away the cultural cachet that Netflix has, especially when it comes to new series, new launches, and new announcements. Do you think tennis will be the next F1?
Well, I'm not the biggest sports guy, so I don't have the right insight into whether tennis really needs this. F1, of course, is a neat sport. So adding a ton of media, spotlight to it went a long way. I actually have personal anecdotes of people who did not give a shit about F1. The next time I met them, they literally wanted to go karting because of Drive to Survive. And Drive to Survive also benefited from having the craziest F1 season follow it, by the way, with like Verstappen winning it all, and it was like a very close race. So, I mean, the power of Netflix is, of course, just not in question at all. They absolutely boosted the sport. Is tennis big enough such that they don't need Netflix? That's what I'm curious about. It's actually going to be a huge win for Netflix if they actually do manage to tangibly boost tennis. I'm not sure how you'll count it, but what it's going to do is going to create some superstars. Like whoever's in the documentary is going to have like 10 times the cachet than they did.
Yeah. Content drives commerce. Content drives commerce. In fun news of the week, the viral AI language tool ChatGPT is now being used by Tinder users to woo their matches. Vidur, tell us what you've been up to on Tinder using ChatGPT. This is like very
Well,
imaginable, isn't it? Like especially for nerds like you who went to Carnegie Mellon.
well, ChatGPT, they say it's a numbers game. And what if you could reach
What would you
1,000
know, Vidur? What
numbers?
would you know?
Dude, I think it's just like the easiest, lowest hanging fruit. Like we all know ChatGPT is going to encroach everywhere. And, one thing we might even talk about later on is how you have to come up with countermeasures to ChatGPT. And I think like every company will be on the hook. Like essentially maybe ChatGPT or some third party AI company will figure out like the anti-ChatGPT detection and then have like a huge business on the hand. Because in things that are based on real human to human interaction, well, social media used to be one of them, and now it's just botted to hell, right? So we've kind of given up on like expecting real people on social media all the time. Is that going to happen to every business that has real people? We've given up on customer support. Are we going to give up on dating apps? It's a huge problem for like Tinder and Match and all these other companies to solve. Like, what would you think? I know you're well past your Tinder days and you never had any, but like, do you think it would change the game if you're a girl? Would you like not want to be on it?
So I don't know, man. I think the general use cases are interesting because I feel like language and command over language is a big deterrent. You know what I mean? Like we guys were discussing something work related, but it's insane how open to interpretation and misinterpretation language can be. And especially when communication isn't your forte, can tools like ChatGPT help you up your game a little bit? So to me, it's both an Achilles heel as well as a conduit to almost Love is Blind like relationships. And when I say Love is Blind, I'm referring to the Netflix show, guys. I'm not referring to the more metaphorical version of Love is Blind. But this to me is almost like an experiment. What happens when you take language and communications outside of the consideration of two people getting to know each other in whatever context? And
But can
what
I
is the
offer
future
a
of it?
weird analogy? Now that
Which
you
is
mentioned that, isn't it kind of like if you used AI to really boost up your images and put them on Tinder? So you're like showcasing something you're not, arguably, right? Like, I mean, even filters go a long way. Some men will even argue this for makeup, but whatever. Let's just say you're presenting something you're not. Now in the chat, you're kind of doing the same thing, right? Using external tools so that when you show up and meet in person, that being the end goal, like you don't look like your photos and you don't sound like you're chatting. So what's left?
yeah. I mean, it's your problem, not mine, because I'm not using any of these platforms. So God bless you, Vidur. God bless you. In other fun news, vibrators have had a big year at CVS and Target, which has
Nice
apparently irked
transition.
Yeah, far right, if you know, from Tinder to vibrators, which has apparently irked far right pundits in the US, but no one gives a shit about far right pundits in the US. Vibrators in general have had a big year, man. In India as well, you know, I don't know if you've been tracking companies like My Muse or Sassy. There's a bunch of them that have come up that have very openly embraced all things female pleasure. Vidur, what is your tippany on female pleasure, given that you haven't contributed to it in the past decade?
Well, there we go. We've gone from my domain to your domain, female pleasure or lack thereof, to the need for self female pleasure. Please, Suchita, go ahead.
Mic drop. No, but you know, I think this trend will always be a taboo. Like I would be surprised to see significant VC investments in the space. So that said, you know,
Really?
companies like
You
My
mean in
Muse
India?
have, in India, definitely. I think even internationally, they still seem to be taboo-ish topics. So, for example, I feel like wellness, sexual pleasure products will be a feature, not the product. So I feel like even if you see companies like Man Matters, right? Their products that target more male performance, so to speak. You know, their Viagra or Ashwagandha equivalents, they are a feature, not a product. Do you know what I mean? So
Mm.
I will be surprised to see companies lead with sexual wellness products and the likes. I feel like it'll always be one of the offerings within a larger ambit that companies have to offer, because it's just the nature of, you know, everything from your advertising guidelines to governmental guidelines to, you know, what can or can't be said. There are all sorts of, you know, societal nuances to find your way through. That's my 2 cents on this space. But a space that is figuratively and literally getting very big is all things beauty, which, you know, we Varun and I discussed in the last episode. And of course, you've got Deepika Padukone's self-care brand called 82 East, which has raised $7.5 million in a seed round, a very nice, fat, juicy seed round. What's your take on celebrity-run beauty brands?
Actually, I heard you and Varun talk about it, and I agree with a lot of it. You know, there's always a balance. Celebrity-run beauty brands will always do well. It's the ultimate influencer commerce model.
Yeah,
Deepika is the biggest brand out there. You seem to think that she was maybe misplaying her hand a little bit. You know, I checked out all their profiles and stuff. It's still to gain like insane traction. Of course, Deepika is going to lead a bunch of people to Instagram immediately. But like, for instance, YouTube was non-existent. They haven't tapped into that yet.
yeah.
Also, I can't judge the product. Like, what do you think of the product?
So I tried. I was influenced by Deepika to buy their Baku choil. I'm not even going to pretend to know what's in it,
Excuse me.
because I have like zero knowledge of all things beauty, as you can tell with the two pimples on my face. But in any case, I tried the product, and it's, you know, the quality is fantastic. Usually with, you know, oil based products, as someone who has very sensitive skin, I end up breaking out. I didn't have any of those issues with her product specifically. Her pricing is very premium. So if you go through some of the Instagram comments, the complaints are products are priced at 2,800, 3,200, which are not your standard Indian pricing, right? Like even if you see a company like The Ordinary, when they launched in India, their launch pricing was very similar to The Minimalist. So long story short, like you usually see Indian brands or brands that are launching in the Indian market adjust their pricing to the purchasing capacity of a typical Indian customer. Devika Padukone seems to be going with 82 East, seems to be going the Fortis Essentials Karma route. And let's see where that goes. Maybe her ambitions with her brand is not to make it large GMV brand, but maybe, you know, scale the brand to a certain amount and then sell it to someone else. So, which seems to be the kind of play. This doesn't seem like a legacy brand for her. Do you know what I mean? Like some celebrities
Yeah,
launch brands hoping, like Goop, right? Gwyneth Paltrow with
yeah.
Goop. For her, Goop was a legacy brand. I'm not sure if it's the same for Deepika Padukone, but you never know, man. In DP, I trust.
Maybe you start out like this and then you sort of see where you go. You don't need to decide like in
Yeah,
advance whether it needs to be a legacy brand or not. But a question for you before you move on from this. You talked about 7.5 million. Yeah, it's a fat check, but like for Deepika, I mean, I don't know. She makes more per movie, right? If I asked you to be in the round, you don't know what product it is. I just told you,
hmm.
Deepika Beauty, are you in? Would you be in?
That's an interesting question. I think a lot of it would depend on how well I knew or didn't know Deepika, because, you know, she's put in money in multiple different. So, for example, through her family office, she's made a lot of investments. Like she's invested in, a couple of furniture rental platforms. She's invested in Epigamia. I think my biggest question over here would be, are you lending your name to this, or are you actively participating? And honestly, if she were actively participating, I would put money in this round, not for
That's what I
anything else.
figured.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, for me, it's contingent on how active are you in imagining the business, promoting the business, taking user feedback, putting it back into the business, and genuinely really building this, brand up from ground up. Similar to what K by Katrina and Katrina Kaif have been able to do, right? They've been able to build a strong business within a larger sort of umbrella of Nykaa. And I think she'd be a great acquisition target, man. I think, 82 East could be an interesting company for, one of these more luxe Estee Lauder type brands to potentially put money into, acquire, take to other shows, given who it's backed by. But without spending too much time on TP, because we're already well over our intro segment, just three couple of quick stories. Everyone thought IPOs were dead, which is true, they are, because a bunch of companies have written off their IPOs. But India's largest wine producer, Sula Vineyards, their IPO was oversubscribed by 2.3x, and Drone Acharya's IPO was oversubscribed by 267x. 262x, and they currently have received bids worth 6,000 odd crores. What do you make of this, quote unquote IPO cool down, but the fairly decent performance of the two companies that have managed to go through?
Yeah, I don't know if this is the exception that proves the rule of the IPO slowdown. There is obviously a real IPO slowdown, not just because of the Indian market, but global macro, which is going to drive a lot of capital. Dronacharya is a great example because everybody wants in on like the hot new thing, and 262x is like insane. You just said 6,000 crores, rough math, that's $750 million of commitments. I mean, that's crazy. So yeah, it's great that somebody is spearheading the way. For a more well-known brand like Sula to be like 2.2x is interesting, but I think like it's not the sexiest business. It's not like the high growth, high pop like drone business. So we get to see how they perform. Of course, like you can have an IPO and maybe you can like really push your syndicate if you're like the investment bank to like just get it oversubscribed. I don't care, promise the world, but it's really a question of how it performs. So something to look out for next week.
Yes, Queen. And we have a bunch of other stories that we could possibly go through. Let's jump into the more meatier, juicier segments of what we're going to cover. So, ladies and gents, Vidur and I will run through first and foremost a quick TLDR on what the hell is even happening at Twitter. We'll then jump to the Google for India event, where they made a couple of announcements, largely around AI, some around AI in health tech, and a lot around YouTube, which we'll talk about briefly. Vidur will also go on a rant on SBF and what lies ahead for all things crypto and Web3. And we'll finally close off with a very interesting article and prediction posted by GGV, a very popular venture capital fund based out of Silicon Valley, which was all around fintech and is the future of fintech, that they will be the super apps and give you the whole realm of fintech in the palm of your hands. And we'll top off with recommendations, and that'll be this episode of Think Fast. So be right back after this break.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. Here's wishing you all a happy new year. As we step in the brand new year 2023, here's introducing Club Paisa Vaisa, which gives you early access to Paisa Vaisa episodes 3 days before release, ad-free content, bonus content, and access to full episode archives. So get your yearly membership today for only rupees 699. Log on to club.ivmpodcast.com/Paisa Vaisa. New episodes are out every Monday. On Cyrus Says, Cyrus is joined by sports anchor and author Nishat Pai Vaidya to talk about the greatest sporting moments from 2022. On Anish Thing, Anish is joined by Jesse and Gabriel, prominent names from Asia bar landscape, and Somana Mutana, co-founder and CEO of The Soul Company. They dish out a long list of 20 best bars in Asia, from Bali to Gurgaon, Hanoi to Hong Kong, and everything about spirits. On The Habit Coach, Ashton is joined by Sangeeta Iyer, nutritionist and founder of a health service called Rewrite Your Story. She shares how animal-based diet changed her life. And on Pulyabazi, Saurabh, Khyati and Pranay revisit the best episode of 2022 and predict the trends of 2023. Once again, don't forget to visit our merch store on ivmpodcast.com. We have some exciting stuff for you. Follow us on social media. We are IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. If you like our shows, please spread the word. Tell your friends and don't forget to rate and review them wherever you're listening to them. You can also find our shows on youtube.com/IVM Podcasts. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week, Capgemini and HDFC Mutual Fund. Thank you for making this possible.
Boys and girls, Varun is busy making money by posting nudes on his OnlyFans account. So joining me today is my buddy Vidur, who is very single. Please follow him on Twitter, Bumble, or wherever else he is, ladies, friends. Vidur, if I am of any use and if this podcast is of any use, you're paying me 10% off the total amount of money you earn in your lifetime because I said so. That's it.
I was going to ask 10% of what? What monetary transaction did you mention when you asked
Your
people
lifetime
to hit me up
income.
because I'm single?
Lifetime income.
Done. Good
But
investment.
you wanted to talk about this, and obviously I've been refraining from my thoughts on all things Twitter and Elon, because what even is the point? This guy is in the news for all sorts of unnecessary reasons. But why don't you go on a rant, man? Kick us off with a rant about what is going on at Twitter and why is Elon such a psychopath?
I could rant about this for the whole show, which I obviously won't. I have lost all respect for Elon. I'm putting it out there. You might lose some fans by me saying this because he's become a very divisive figure. What I won't go into is the reason he's divisive, which usually breaks down to left-wing, right-wing American politics, with the right wing being a bit more psychotic than the left. And by a bit, I mean a lot. So that's him, the personality. Let's just talk about Twitter, of course, led by him. But in the last few days alone, what has happened? I mean, this is as topical as it gets. I'm sure you saw it. They basically, Elon, basically ran a poll saying, should I resign as the CEO of Twitter? And he's done this before to ask whether he should bring back Donald Trump, etc. And whatever the result came, he would annoyingly say Vox Populi, Vox Dei, which is a misuse of a quote, implying that the voice of the people is voice of the God. It actually means the opposite, by the way, in context. Anyway, in this case, he lost the poll, 57% to 43%, and he's been a little bit silent. So this is like an ongoing story because we're yet to hear about what he says. He did ask, does anybody want the job, essentially, by saying that. And a lot of like Elon simps stepped up saying, yes, I can do it. Lex Friedman,
so
the podcaster,
pathetic,
is
bro.
like,
can you imagine?
Oh my God, it's so mega
that
cringe.
Lex Friedman response was just like, bro, come on. I mean, you're not some like champu on the street who can't, you know what I mean? It's just like, what a freaking loser. But
dude, so many podcast bros volunteered, by the way. Like, you don't even know the ecosystem. Like, the Valuetainment guy, he has a couple of million subs. He ran some businesses. They all like fucking posting their business plans of what they will do as though like he actually gives a shit, like taking him at his word. Funnily enough, afterwards he posted, whoever wants power doesn't deserve it. Like something along those lines. So he basically like shut them all down. But Elon is nothing but a troll. But let's just talk about why this might be happening. Again, I don't want like conspiracy, like just fact, but there is at least one Tesla big investor / board, somebody on the board who literally wants him out at Tesla. And forget like fact pattern. Let's just talk about opinion. If I was a Tesla shareholder, and we talked about my qualifications, but if there's one thing I used to be that I got trained to be is a public market investor, and I worked at a fund that essentially used like Warren Buffett style principles. There were 4 pillars of investing, and valuation obvious, the business franchise obvious, growth obvious, the 4th one management, and if the 4th one didn't meet the cut, you did not invest. Now, how can this manager, of the CEO of 3 companies, one of whom he's running ad hoc, crazy policy, we'll talk once more about like the policy he reversed about posting outside link. As a Tesla investors, how are you satisfied with this? I mean, if he didn't have and he has 13% of Tesla shares, he just sold 3% more because of Twitter. I mean, wouldn't you want to kick this guy out? Or at least tell him like either focus on Tesla or just don't?
Yeah, and you see that happen, right? Tesla shares have apparently fallen 28% since Elon Musk took over Twitter. He seems to be all over the place and also getting himself into a lot of trouble. Like I think he was posing with some, psycho funds from Saudi Arabia, or I don't know if you saw this, but he was taking pictures with, a couple of people who've been indicted. Say, jump in. You'll know more about this than I will.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, maybe the pictures are meaningless because he was in Qatar to watch the World Cup and people saw the chance to take a photo of him, Jared Kushner, and a bunch of Saudis. Maybe those are coincidental Saudis at the Qatar World Cup. But the Saudis are on his Twitter cap table. along with a lot of big investors like Larry Ellison and others. I mean, but that's Twitter. And I'm talking about Tesla here. Like, that's a much bigger company that you would be worried about. As you correctly said, Tesla is down 28%. Meanwhile, the S&P is not down even 10%, I think, during the same period. So he's trying to blame like interest rates. And oh, by the way, every time somebody questions him, he says it's the macro environment. He actually wrote, "This is how finance works, security analysis 101. If the rates go up, the stock price goes down." Yeah, not more than 28%, bro, when the S&P is down 10%. So he's running out of excuses, you know, and this is the sign of a bad manager. Like I said, you know, I worked at a very prestigious fund deploying billions, and immediately they would pull out their billions, seeing their behavior. I'm not saying whether they invested in Tesla or not, but a lot of buy-side funds were giving him the Elon leeway, the Elon rope that no other Fortune 500 CEO in this world gets. And I'm curious when that runs out, you know, on this particular topic. As for the Saudis, he is trying to raise money for Twitter, additional funds. He revealed to Lex Friedman that Twitter's on the brink of bankruptcy. He's trying to raise money at the price that he bought it. And he keeps saying that he overpaid for it. Like, what is he doing? What are the chances somebody... Yeah, can you imagine how stupid an investor would need to be?
Yeah. So where do you think he goes from here? Now, obviously, he's lost a lot of popularity, especially amongst, you know, tech bros, you being in that general cohort. Where do you think he goes from here? And what do you think happens to Twitter, you know, all things considered? Is it just a ticking time bomb which will, you know, erupt into flames at some point? Or is this just one of those Elon being Elon, doing what he needs to do to get attention, you know, bridge over some amount of money with that attention, and then things go back to normal?
Yeah, that's a good summary of one very generous hypothesis of what he might be doing. Before I prognosticate, just to talk about your tech bro point, a lot of tech bros are like extremely pro Elon in this whole fiasco as well. You know, a lot of like hardcore tech bros end up being like very anti-establishment, and also they think they know best, and also they worship Elon. It's a cult of personality. It's very Trump-like in that sense. So yeah, it's been divisive. Not all tech bros are one side or the other. But yeah, a lot of people are disillusioned, of course. And where it goes, it depends how he sees the business, man. He has to rescue Twitter from bankruptcy. Without getting into too much details, he put a lot of debt onto Twitter's balance sheet. Unnecessary leverage. This was like a leverage buyout, like $10 billion of debt. And that's on Twitter's balance sheet. It's not against his Tesla shares or anything. So they need to come up with $1 billion in just debt servicing. That's why he keeps floating the bankruptcy term around. So first things first, stop the company from going bankrupt. I don't think Twitter $8 check marks are going to put much of a dent there. He just needs to like bring back to core business. It all depends on whether he steps down. I mean, he'll still be the puppeteer behind the scenes, but I think somebody can rescue it. It's a real business. It's still Twitter, you know?
Yeah, hundo. I don't want to waste too much oxygen on Elon or Twitter because I'm so over this. So I'm going to segue into what I want to waste oxygen on, which is, so obviously Google had this large Google for India event where Sundar Pichai, you know, made his way to India after actually a very long time and took the stage along with a minister, and obviously there's a whole Google team, you know, doing their usual shtick of announcements, this, that, and the other. I had a chance to attend the event, and you know, obviously there were a bunch of key takeaways that you know, I've made a note of from the event, but a couple of very interesting, you know, more like prima facie takeaways from the event. One was there was absolutely no mention of NBU. And if you remember any of the earlier, you know, Google for India pitches or, you know, communication angles, everything was about next billion users. What are we doing to get the next, you know, 300-400 million users onto the internet? It seems like Google's obviously made significant headway there. For example, there's this one data point that Sapna Chadha, who's their CMO, shared, which where she essentially said that, you know, I think a couple of years ago, 1 in every 10 women in rural India were using the internet. And now that number has gone up to 4 in every 10 women in rural India are using the internet. So, you know, it seems like they made progress on a couple of the older milestones that they had set. The other interesting thing that I found was there wasn't much really on Google Pay apart from security as a point. So, you know, how do you make payments more secure? How do you ensure there's, you know, data protection, this, that, and the other? Those two, which used to, you know, really occupy the length and breadth of all things Google for India, were largely missing. What do you think this is? Is it just Google's done what they had to do and now it's, you know, time to move on to what's next? What do you think is happening here?
Honestly, I'll defer to you because not only were you there, but you've attended the previous events. You're like clearly pointing out the delta between the two events on some of their key products that they were focusing on. I mean, sometimes I wonder about next billion users, whether they've already reached too many users to even like harp upon that. It could be like as fundamental as like logistical as that. But Google Pay, I mean, listen, like some products fail. I know Google Pay has a market share, but that might not be the focus. What I also want to know from you is like, what was the vibe check? Because I only saw it on YouTube, especially like the IT minister talk and other like Sundar interviews essentially. And did he seem like all in or India, or was it like cursory talking points? Because to be honest, it seemed like the latter, but he's not the most emotive, expressive fellow.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely because he's not the most emotive, expressive fellow. That's one part of it. And I think the second part of it also is um, a lot of these, conferences and trips of senior leadership that the CEO of Alphabet was in India is a non-trivial, you know what I mean? Like it's extremely important and telling that he himself made his way to India. So I think him being here in, flesh and blood set the right tone in terms of in terms of how seriously Google takes India. I think the other things that came up was it seems like they've obviously made a lot of headway in the more basics. Obviously with their investment in a larger internet penetration, their partnerships with Geo and the likes, in making sure that their services and their platforms are available, to more Indians. I think they've checked all of those boxes. In fact, I think their Geo partnership was, a big one in helping them bridge some of the gap in between, that 200 to 300 million monthly users that everyone from Facebook to Google has, and really expanding it out of that, top sort of cohort. But I think the big win for me from this particular session and this particular Google for India event was just how important YouTube is going to be in India for Google. So, just a couple of announcements that they made. One was they're launching courses on YouTube. So they, brought this creator out on the stage, and it seems like they're giving the likes of Unacademy and Byju's a run for their money by essentially empowering creators to launch their own courses and obviously make money through those courses. Now, they're not the first ones who've attempted this. Like Instagram also attempted in the US some feature like this called subscription, where you can subscribe to creators who you like and whose content you follow. But I think of all the platforms that exist, YouTube seems to be the one that has the closest shot at actually driving a dent through courses as a feature. Because if you look at the use cases of YouTube in India, it is education, right? It is categories like health tech and the likes. So and here's a question for you, right? One of the big writings on the wall was, has time come for Unacademy and Byju's to be challenged not by an upstart but by a platform as large as YouTube? Do you think courses will make a dent or not as much?
Yeah, they definitely could, particularly in the wake of what happened with COVID. Let's not forget that every child in India, by hook or by crook, hopefully had to be armed with a mobile phone, with internet access, so that they could educate themselves. And this is sort of a natural continuation, because obviously, if you have a phone, you have YouTube, right? Very interesting that creators will get paid for it, because that extra incentive of like a very clear, a company that has empowered so many creators, it's supported over 7.5 lakhs full-time jobs. I mean, we're talking about $1.5 billion to India's economy by doing this. That's a proven model, right? If I'm just a person on the street, and I am a person on the street, and you told me, hey, create a course and we'll figure it out how to get it to Unacademy, and like somewhere in the midst you'll get paid, I might not be that incentivized. But if you tell me, hey, why don't you create courses on YouTube, and like whatever you're talking about here, just talk on YouTube, maybe you get paid, just like maybe you're a YouTuber. Suddenly I'm incentivized. So I really like the lack of friction there. And I mean, listen, we always talk about like big dogs entering anything. You have to be Amazon proof, you have to be Facebook proof, you certainly have to be Google proof. But Google and Facebook and Amazon, they all fail as well. And Academy, anytime you have a focused niche, I mean, you definitely have a good pillar to stand on. But YouTube is YouTube, man. Like YouTube is as ubiquitous as it gets, right? Like if there's one platform that has potential in India, it's YouTube. Any other takeaways, by the way? Because the one thing I heard in the IT minister talk was a lot of localization and some talk about like maybe it being AI supported or something.
Yeah, so there seemed to be a very, very, very heavy focus on all things AI, and I'm not going to pretend to remember all of them because some of like I wasn't fully paying attention to everything that was being discussed. But one big, topic that you mentioned as well is this focus on languages and using AI as a way to scale content and information in, multiple languages. So, for example, one feature that the YouTube India head spoke about was how they're launching a very simple tool that will enable creators to dub their videos in multiple different languages. So, as a creator, I may create in English, but I can get my video dubbed in Marathi, Tamil, whatever else. So, which to me is monumental, because that's the big scale hindrance in the Indian context, right? The biggest scale hindrance is that you need to either have a lot of creators in multiple different languages creating content, but then you'll always have Pareto, because your top languages, which will be Hindi, Tamil, Marathi, Telugu, and the likes, those will always have lion's share. But India is a country of not just your top 18 languages, but hundreds of others and thousands of other dialects. So to me, the AI application in language, specifically in the context of YouTube, was super interesting. And I think the last thing that I'll say over here is, I'm not saying this facetiously, but I really like how Google puts the focus on women as a part of the narrative. And you saw this happen across the board, right? There was conversations around Project Vani, where they had, showcased a lot of, like, women in rural sort of contexts and circumstances, and how, projects like Project Vani, Project Relate will enable and empower more of those. They also announced ensuring that parts of I think, a $300 million fund that is to be deployed on Indian startups. I think a fourth or 30% or something of that will be committed to women-led enterprises and women, quote unquote, women entrepreneurs. So to me, and most importantly, I forgot to add this, but I think what was lovely to see was a number of women from Team Google who were put on stage. You've obviously seen that narrative change with Facebook and Google in the past couple of years, where representation isn't just about quota systems, right? It is about bringing women and strong, quote unquote, female leaders into the mainstream and into the more public fold of how information, especially in the context of these large conferences, is consumed. So shout out to Google, man. I really love the elegant immersive, inclusive way in which they showcased what the role that women play for Google's success in India, both from a consumer perspective, but also from a team perspective. But I'm going to jump to the third story, which
Can I just add something to that, by the way,
Yes, please,
before you
please,
do?
please.
Firstly, I'm
Yeah.
happy to hear the women piece, of course. I'll add to the props there to Google as well, especially coming from you, because I know if it was performative as opposed to principled, like I would be hearing about
it out. Yeah.
I know you would have called it out. I did want to add an interesting example of the dubbing, because internationally, this has been a model that's been proven by Mr. Beast, everybody's favorite YouTuber that just hit 100 million subs, by the way. And he started translating a lot of his content. I'm not just saying dubbing, but translating, because if there was text inside the video, he would get a video creator to like redo the edit and make it in Spanish and make it in other languages, and found insane success. There's clips floating around of him showing this to Joe Rogan. Check it out if anybody's interested. And as a result, he formed his own agency to do this for other creators, right? So it's already like a service level skill. And if and when this comes to India, whether it's AI supported or not, actually one of the second order effects, I can already see hundreds of people on Fiverr and Upwork offering their services to just translate into whatever local regional dialect they're from, which I think is really cool. It's like a cool second order effect.
Yeah. Look at you adding your little nerdy tidbits to this
second order
particular
effects,
story.
baby.
Oh my God. Okay, switching gears to the mother of all second order effects, which is, look at what SBF has done to crypto. I have so many questions for you as someone who has been reading about SBF's stupidity more as an external, impartial observer, looking for a good laugh, than someone who has any skin in the game as far as crypto is concerned. So a couple of things. First and foremost is, why don't you start by giving our listeners a quick summary of exactly what this SBF debacle is and where things are at right now?
No, I'll keep it really short. If anybody's heard of Bernie Madoff, who basically was running a Ponzi scheme instead of a hedge fund, SBF was doing the exchange version of that. An exchange is a place where you buy and sell anything, but in this case, it was crypto. So essentially, people are trading all the time. It's kind of like the New York Stock Exchange, except it's for crypto. This guy was taking all the money that you would put into your account to trade on that exchange and giving it to this little hedge fund he ran on the side. It's actually a fund that started before the exchange did. He started the exchange just to, in a way, support that fund. The fund was called Alameda Research, a fancy name so that banks would lend to him at a time that nobody would lend to crypto companies. So he just kept taking money from FTX and propping up this hedge fund, aka like a complete shit show of a hedge fund / gambling / trading apparatus called Alameda Research. Long story short, Alameda lost $7 to $8 billion. We're yet to find out how and what the exact amount is. And he kept funding those losses through the money that people kept pummeling into his exchange. And of course, famously, the exchange became so big over the course of 2 to 3 years that not only did he become a gazillionaire, his net worth was up to $30 billion. The valuation of the company itself was up to like 30, maybe the next round would have been even higher, $1 billion, because he kept like marketing himself like crazy, not just himself, but the exchange. They had Tom Brady most recently. They had the Miami basketball stadium named after them to FTX Arena. They sponsored like so many Super Bowl ads, and they sponsored every influencer. So a crazy, like essentially Ponzi, there's details as to what was happening, but it was fraud. Like he knew what he was doing. He just pretended otherwise afterwards.
But like
shoot,
a
any questions you have?
Ponzi. I mean, it was very,
very
unfazed. It was very, I'm going to do this out in the open and, let's see what happens with the consequences. And that's my next question for you, right? Which is, what really are the consequences of something like this? Obviously, we all know that he's been imprisoned, and there's apparently like 100-year sentence at the peak of it, which could possibly be passed against him. But where does one go from here? Where does SBF go from here? It just gets locked up in prison, and that's where it ends.
Well, for reference, firstly, he just got imprisoned a couple of days ago in the Bahamas. And usually the extradition process, and he will be extradited to the United States, the extradition process can take years and years. But apparently, the prison there is so bad, and it's notoriously bad, by the way, that he himself wants to speed up the extradition. He could have delayed it for a year. Personally, I don't see the point either. He's going to jail. As for how long, like we don't know. That's obviously judge and jury. But for reference, Bernie Madoff, who of course did a higher amount scam, although not as brazen and not as bold. As you said, it was sort of just like hidden and like the ultimate Ponzi. He just kept lying to investors. He went to jail in 2008 when he came out, saying that he did it. He died in jail 12 years later. His son committed suicide. So, there's no good outcome here. What's interesting is like his accomplices, SBF's accomplices, are still out in the wild. So we don't know what case is being brought against them. There's also rumor, by the way, just to make this a little more salacious, the woman who ran the hedge fund, the sort of the gambling arm that lost all that money, was apparently his ex-girlfriend. What is, some version of Boo Bay X. And she might have turned on him, actually. Like, that might be one of the reasons that he got arrested really quickly, that she's out in the wild. So there's all these kind of crazy stories. He's not in a good place. But what's interesting is, just to roll it back like a week or two, he was doing this like press tour. Like, I think he thought he was going to get away with it. Like, because he came on, Deal Book Conference, Andrew Ross Sorkin,
which was wild,
saying like, I'm really sorry, I messed up, it happens. And then he pretended, I said it was fraud. He pretended it was like bad risk management. That's some really bad risk management. He basically had a player at the casino, at his own casino, who had access to unlimited funds. And he's calling it bad risk management. So that didn't work out, clearly. What happens next? I mean, he's going to jail, whether it's Theranos jail or like Bernie Madoff jail. I guess we'll find out.
This doesn't end well. So 2 quick follow-up questions. First and foremost, I think a lot of the narrative has been around, why do people fall for these hyped up founders, especially founders who hype themselves up? And I think the biggest exhibit A of this is the note that the Sequoia team wrote, right? The memo that was written which was just wild, wild west. What I was saying was, I don't think I've seen so many investors fawn over someone who has negged them so publicly. It's wild.
It's like a scene from Silicon Valley when Erlich Bachman is trying to raise money, and it just gets worse and worse, and eventually he puts his like schlong on the table, and apparently it works. These guys just fell for it. They were like, oh my God, like, I love this founder. He was playing League of Legends while we were on the call with us. Obviously, they've deleted it. There's a lot of deleted stuff going on recently. I don't know if you've noticed. Elon, Sequoia, etc. Yeah, I mean, I want to hear your opinion, man. Like, what do you think of these VCs who get on the hype train? Is it because you know the business model of VCs better than I do? Is it fair that they just have to be on the bandwagon and maybe not do enough due diligence, or is it a complete like fiduciary mess up of their responsibility to the
I
LPs?
think it's a giant fiduciary mess up, and I will be shocked if examples like this and many others that have happened in the Indian context don't get
Oh,
raised by LPs, very, very, very aggressively. For what it's worth, Shaw Sequoia did put 150 million dollars into FTX. It's not the world's biggest gamble for them, let's be honest. And I'm not obviously I'm not talking about Sequoia India. I'm talking about the Sequoia US based fund. So and is this amount recoverable by Sequoia? 100% yes, which is what their follow up to this FTX debacle also stated. So I don't know, man. I have a bit of a I think there's all types of investors. And I think there's all types of founders. I think, people like Elizabeth Holmes and SBF are like sit at the peak of terrible, terrible, terrible founders who use their confidence, and their quote unquote connects to create all sorts of crazy stories.
it works though.
Uh,
It works. It,
I mean, it
it
works
feels
to
like
what
you
extent? This
need
guy is
it.
going to jail, bro. So, like, all things considered, does it
I
really
agree.
work? Elizabeth Holmes' ass is going to be sitting in jail for as long as we can,
As our children
I
grow
think
up, and that's obviously awful. But I mean, listen, I just wonder who else is out there who does. These are the people who got caught, right? And you
yeah,
asked me like it was very bold. You said it was very bold, but he was trying to like earn his way out of it. Every criminal does that, of course. Every like financial criminal thinks they can earn their way out of it, especially traders, which he used to be. I do want to focus on the founder. Elizabeth Holmes is obviously the clear like corollary here, but
yeah.
I don't get it. Like, what was so magnetic about him? And I'm not just saying after the fact, but like even before the fact. I want to add one more thing here. Two things, in fact. One was he was the front face of effective altruism. Viewers can look
Which
that
is
up at their
wild.
own.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is wild. But like, it's essentially the idea that you should be very like thoughtful about giving. And his whole thing was, I want
Hmm.
to make large amounts of money so I can give it. Okay, common story. But then in like some Twitter DMs to some journalist, and this is verified, he just openly said that was a scam. It was just a face he was putting on. Okay, great. Second, he gave at least $50 million to the Democratic Party, the second biggest donor after George Soros in the current
Yeah.
election cycle, and apparently gave the same amount in dark money to the Republican Party as well. So he was like trying to like buy his way into favorable regulation. I mean, a 30-year-old kid, like gazillionaire, like that's making some big moves, man. And I wonder if it was to protect himself or to
Hmm.
actually further advance the industry.
Whatever it was, I hope his ass is locked up in prison. Before we get into our last topic for the day, which will be followed by recommendations, we will take a quick break and be right back with Vidur and not Varun on this episode of Think Fast. Okay, ladies and gents, we are back. We've spoken about Twitter, we've spoken about SBF, we have also spoken about the Google in India presentation slash announcement slash report of sorts. And now we're going to segue into a really interesting article that I stumbled upon earlier this week, written by GGV, which is a very popular Silicon Valley based venture capital fund, which essentially painted this sort of theory or thesis on how fintech over time, most fintech platforms will become all-in-one platforms. That's what their hypothesis is. That's what they seem to also want to be making bets on and investing in. Vidur, let me shoot this question at you first. Which is, when you look at the fintech landscape on both ends, whether it's B2B, more SaaS type businesses, or even B2C type businesses, you do see over time they become a sum of features. You know what I mean? Like, very few of them have been able to really make a mark, based on a single revenue model or a single type of revenue stream to their businesses and consumers. So, is this revelation of GGV, is it an obvious one? Is it something that's taken time for them to hypothesize and stumble upon? What's your take on this particular thesis?
You know, you raised an interesting point earlier that like all fintech, especially B2C fintech, is still B2B fintech, you know. So
Yeah.
GGB is essentially saying, hey, if you're B2B fintech, you should like cover more income streams by offering more services to your customer. It seems very obvious, but then most consulting outcomes and conclusions also very obvious. They can still have value. So I don't know about commenting on that. I'm certainly not an expert. Let me just tell you one personal touch point I have to this. As I said, I used to be a media investor, but one of the random verticals I covered happened to be financials, and that meant Indian banks. So I used to cover HDFC, ICICI, Axis as an investor. And every quarter when we met them, they had the same story. By they, I mean the CEO. We are going to be a super app for all things finance for every customer that we have, and we're going to offer them this and we're going to offer them that, and it's all going to be on an app. The thing is, money is the ultimate commodity, as they say, and as a result, banking and financial services are also the ultimate commodity. So if somebody can really beat you on like price experience, user experience, or like the price of a loan, etc., yeah, that might be a competitive edge. But then ultimately, how do you do that without taking on more risk if you're offering things like lending, if you're offering things like maybe insurance or whatever it might be? So I don't personally believe in the quality of these revenue streams. My question to you is, who has proven this out? I know the GGV article mentioned Amazon and Shopify. I mean, those are like global players at the highest level. What is the equivalent in India? Like, who has even come close?
I think if you look at companies like Paytm, right, or even what Ashwada Modran, his sort of note on Paytm, he actually had this really interesting interview that he done with the folks at Cap Table, where he prophesized this, right. He said that at the end of the day, anyone who's playing in fintech, it essentially comes down to one problem statement, which is who are you aggregating? So, for example, in Paytm's case, sure, Paytm may say that they have, over whatever, like 80, 90 million consumers transacting, quote unquote, through their platforms and through their, pipes. But actually, if you look at who the Paytm, quote unquote, customer is, it is a merchant, right? It is a seller. And the seller in their case ranges from a kirana store seller, to a, small business in the Indian context. Switch over to, for example, something like Razorpay. Razorpay again is, falls in that paradigm of B2B2C, but the Razorpay merchant is dramatically different from the Paytm merchant. And if I had to juxtapose, now obviously these are two examples, Razorpay and Paytm are two examples which are more so known from a business facing perspective. But if I had to switch gears and talk about stuff that's happening on the consumer side, one credit that I'll give, which is fully due, is the folks at Cred, because I think obviously they've made their blunders and mistakes over the course of the 4 to 5 odd years of them building Cred out, which happens with every company and every founder. But I think one thing that they did extremely well was speak to a type of consumer who they chose to be the top 20-25 million odd consumers in India, but then offer them a suite of financial services. And let's be honest, most recurring financial transactions end up being your quote unquote business as usual or lifestyle as usual use cases, right? I need to pay my phone bill, I need to pay my rent, I need to pay whatever else. It's just they were able to do
credit
this
card
for
bill, their core offering.
Exactly, your credit card bill, right? Get better rewards on your credit card bill. So I think there is still a lot to do within fintech. So, for example, one simple data point is which was a part of this article, the total revenue generated by public financial services is 7 trillion, and fintech disruptors only account for about 150 billion, or 2% of this total amount. And I'm assuming this includes platforms like Square, or platforms like Stripe, which again play in that fintech payment processing particular category or vertical. But whether you look at B2B examples or you look at B2C examples, net what you see happen is your GTM, so your go-to market, will be acquiring a certain type of merchant or a certain type of consumer. But at the end of the day, when you're operating on a 1 to 3% margin business, which is most payment processing businesses, the only way you're really able to build that volume is go into as many use cases of that merchant or that customer as is possible. And in summary, that said, there are multiple different types of consumers and there are multiple different types of merchants, who technology, specifically in the financial realm, can still be built for. And I have a bunch of other examples, but I want you to jump in and give me your, think fast on my little ramble here.
Well, yeah, I mean, props to Cred for knowing who their customer is, because unlike any of the other apps you mentioned, I am not that familiar with B2B fintech. So maybe Razorpay knows exactly who their customer is, but I know who Cred's customer is, and that's very commendable, right? That makes it so much easier to hone in on all these other offerings you're talking about. CredPay being a good example, for instance. One thing we didn't talk about, which we were actually talking about in some of the intro topics, is like the factor of regulation here. You mentioned how only give or take, what was it, like single-digit percentage of financial services has been disrupted, right? Hundreds of billions out of 15 trillion. Well, a huge reason for that is regulation. Yeah, because like banks are built to be essentially the pipes with which money is distributed through the economy, as long as they listen to the regulator, right? And fintech is always fighting an uphill battle. This almost relates to SBF, by the way. There's a reason he's being extradited from the Bahamas. Is because he had to be in the Bahamas in the first place. Is because he couldn't get passed in regulation in any other country. That's why they chose the Bahamas. It wasn't because of the weather, you know. So if you want to function in an industry, you want to be regulated. Now, they do say in finance, innovators tend to be ahead of regulators, but I don't know if that's true in India. That's more true like at investment banks where they know how to cheat the system. I think in India, you're at the behest of the regulator. And of course, if you want growth, you want to do it the right way. So I think that's going to be a big impediment. And let's not forget, this is my 2 cents. I personally think like with the macro environment, a credit cycle is also coming. You know, so all this like demand for credit, I mean, the whole point of interest rates going up is your demand for credit goes down. And if this is the revenue stream that these companies have planned to showcase growth, revenue, or profitability, they might be in for a tough time.
Yep, and you've seen countless examples of that this year, right? There was this massive shocker that happened in the start of this year where, companies like Slice and I think Unicards, there was a sort of like stoppage on issuance of credit cards based on proxy accounts, which is usually how this buy now, pay later type business, works. We obviously spoke about the RBI locking down and really hunkering down on enabling fintech platforms to add more merchants to their overall base. So, totally aligned on this, which is, and I guess this is the biggest underlying principle to GGV's article, right? When you've got the unfortunate opportunity of large regulators coming in, possibly clamping down on parts of your business needs to be sum of parts. Where even if, for example, one revenue stream becomes defunct, because of a certain change in regulation, this, that, and the other, you've at least got other things to double down on. And just a very simple and dumb example to sort of end this segment out with, but look at what UPI did to Paytm. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't know what the government's coming up with. You don't know what they're going to put under their purview. And if you can't be in bed with the regulators, then you might as well make sure you have enough bets to circumvent anything that they may come to you with.
I like that summary. If you can't be in bed, if you can't be SBF and like funnel $100 million to both sides, then you might as well have multiple income streams and hedge yourself. Good takeaway.
Yes, queen. And with that, Vidur, wow, we haven't like killed each other yet, guys. Ladies and gents, we guys had uncanny. Like this is unbelievable, because usually when Vidur and I get into discussions, someone dies at the end. Someone has like something thrown at them, and it's usually Vidur because such is the nature of our relationship. But let's get into the last segment, which is recommendations for the week. What are you recommending to our listeners this week, Vidzi?
I'm recommending something I'm very sad we didn't get to cover at the top of the show, because it is very, very topical as much as the FIFA World Cup. Avatar 2. I knew you'd be pissed, but hey, shout out to Varun as we close out this episode. I don't think I did enough justice to irritating you as much as Varun does with movie recommendations. But I can only hope that if he was here, he would have seen it. He would have been recommending it. It is mind-blowing. It doesn't even make sense how good it is. Anybody who complains about it is an idiot. It is a masterpiece. Go watch it. Also, I think it's going to make $2 billion, prediction made.
Okay, let's see how long your prediction goes. But my recommendation for the week, so if you're in the mood for watching something very lame and very time pass, I highly recommend Harry and Meghan season 2, not season 2, part 2 of their Netflix show. I thought it was genius. I thought it was a great recovery. Dude, it was excellent. I feel like this was like the right PR move for them, because people like me who are on team Harry and Meghan have, more ammo and impetus to stay on their side versus venture into other territories. I have a
Who
podcast
are you picking
recommendation.
these arguments with? Who is against Harry and Meghan for you? Because I'm
Piers
not, and I'm
Morgan.
usually.
Not
Oh
that,
my
not
gosh.
that I am picking a fight directly with him. But my second recommendation, which I'm doing after a very long time, is actually recommending an episode from a podcast. There's a very good conversation in between Kara Swisher and Piers Morgan that happened on her podcast called On with Kara Swisher. And very balanced. Both of them obviously have contradictory points to one another. Both of them aren't on the same page on everything. But it's a really good example of how civil debates can be. And I think Twitter definitely needs to see more of that. You know what I mean? You can disagree with one another, but you don't have to ban the other person or kick them off your platform or block their account in order to make a point. So that would be my recommendations for the week. And with that, it's a
Well,
show.
yeah, well, let me take an opportunity to firstly thanks for having me, and thanks to Varun for letting me sub in. Have fun in the Maldives, and if and when we do this the next time, we'll have more hot topics so we can like really tassel and show the audience what our usual hangouts are all about.
I
But
know
this was
we've
really fun.
really been on our best behavior, which
It's
is
because I'm
great.
channeling
Which is great.
Varun and not myself. Yeah.
If you were channeling Varun, you would have made a bunch of bad jokes. You would have bored me with
Oh yeah,
bullshit
that's
about
true.
movies and RRR
That's
and
those
Avatar.
are skills.
And yes, those are real life skills, real entertainer skills that Varun has. But guys, Varun's going to be back next week. We're going to have an episode on our predictions for 2023. And I'm assuming I will win this year's predictions just like I won last year's predictions. So see you on the next episode. And thanks, Vidzi. Toodles,
Thank
listeners.
you. Thank you.